Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. Hey, thanks as always for watching or listening to Fluff and Crunch. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, ring the bell if you are on YouTube so that you can get notifications of any new videos. I apologize, this is a day late, but work has been really busy, so there we are. Life intrudes. So this is my third episode in my series of how to play your best game. Part one was engagement. Part two was avoid politics, and I mentioned in both of those that I would do an episode about specific engagement tactics or techniques, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. But before I get into that, thank you for those folks who listened to last week's episode about politics. Thank you for weighing in. I had some good conversations with folks on through the comments on YouTube, and I really appreciate that. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And for those folks who played in my Star Trek Adventures game so many years ago at RingCon, thank you so much for weighing in. I really appreciate that. You guys were a lot of fun. I remember that. You showed up. It's always cool when people you don't know show up at your table at a con and they're in a little group and they're like, okay, we're here and we're ready to do this thing. Now, you said you wanted to learn 2D20 mechanics so you could play Dune, but then you admitted in your comments that unfortunately, sounds like life has intruded into your gaming and you haven't gotten around to playing Dune yet, so you should. But anyway, I really appreciate you listening and taking the time to reach out. I hope all is well with you folks. Like I said, I appreciated you guys, and I remember that game. It was fun. So let's get on to some very simple, straightforward engagement tactics or techniques, whichever word you prefer to use. I'm going to look at this from both GM and player perspectives. These are things that I believe that you can do to increase your engagement and increase the engagement of others at the table. Now, Friedrich Schiller, who was a German philosopher and writer many centuries ago, said something along the lines of, you don't have to tell someone to follow a rule to get them to follow it. You just have to follow it yourself, and you will thus serve as an example to others to follow it. So model these. If you're a GM and you want to see these in your players, maybe you recommend one or two, and then you maybe pull aside, like if you have a player or two that are kind of more inclined to your ideas or on your side or you're closer friends with, say, hey, listen, would you be willing to really lean into this and try this out for a while? Then that person models it as an example, not as an admonishment or even a recommendation, and other people potentially, hopefully, over time, understand it, adapt it, and they follow it. So let me hit the player's side of things first. The first thing you can do to help yourself remain engaged is to remove distractions. I talked about this in the first episode about this, part one. Remove distractions. And I think the two biggest distractions that you as a player can carry to the table are a mobile device and a rule book. So I highly recommend that you remove those. You put the phone on, you turn it off, or you put it on silent or something like that, and you put it away. You don't put it on the table. You don't put it in your pocket. You don't put it anywhere within reach. You actually put the thing away so that it becomes a non-entity at the table. I also suggest that you do that for rule books, because it's easy when you have a thought like, oh, maybe I should try that, or for whatever reason you decide that you want to start page flipping, and page flipping is a distraction as well. It draws your mental focus away from what's going on at the table into something else, and it puts you and that thing together on a one-to-one connection and blots out everybody and everything else. So remove those distractions. Now you might think to yourself, wait a minute, what if I need the rule book? Well, and I'm going to do a whole episode on this for both players and GMs in the near future, but know the rules. I mean, I don't hate to say that. Know the rules, understand the core mechanic. If you're the player, you have to understand the core mechanic of the game. If you're new to a game, obviously, you might fumble and stumble some, but really, if you're going to play a game, you have to know the rules. There isn't an excuse for that, beyond the first session or two. And then also know the character specific rules that are relevant to you. Know them, not know of them, know them. And like I said, I'll do an episode on how do you get up to speed on those kinds of things. But if you aren't if you don't have something that is going to call your attention or enable you to drop off from the table a book or a device, those are, I say, your first really positive steps to remaining engaged. Okay, so then how do you do that? Obviously, one way that you can do that is pay attention. That sounds so silly, but sometimes the simplest answer, it may not be easy to follow, to implement, but the simplest answer is the most direct one and the most valid one. Pay attention. When someone is talking, don't talk. Don't talk to anybody. Watch that person. Pay attention to that person. Listen to what they're saying. Don't just hear the sound that's coming out of their mouth. Take the time to listen to the other person. Following on the heels of that, take notes. Take notes on paper. And I'll talk about this, the value of taking notes on paper as opposed to a device. Anyway, I'll talk about that in my episode about learning the rules and ways that you can quickly and firmly learn the rules so that you don't have to page flip. But take notes. Take notes on what the other players are saying, what their characters are doing, especially what the GM is saying. Look, if you went to college, you were probably never taught how to take notes. I used to teach. I taught high school and college for a number of years. And most people were never taught to take notes. Maybe I'll talk about that at some point. I'm not going to get into detail about that. I'm just going to say take notes. Come up with your own shorthand, a 2 or 3 letter abbreviation of all the other characters. I think characters first because then that keeps your focus on the story and not the meta side of things. Maybe assign each character at the table like a 2-letter like state code, like we have for postage in the United States. To make it easy, come up with your own little shorthand of for writing. That will probably develop naturally if you commit to taking notes. But here's the thing with taking notes: it does a couple of things for you. It gives you something that being engaged at the table is necessary in order to do. Okay, think about that for a moment. If you're saying to yourself, "Listen, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to pay attention to what John and Sarah and whoever else is at the table, what they're talking about. I'm going to listen to my GM, not here. I'm going to listen to my GM." It's easy when you're just sitting there and you're listening for your mind to wander, especially if your GM talks a lot or someone else talks a lot or whatever. It's easy for your mind. It is easy for your mind to wander. Therefore, what you do is you make yourself accountable to something else. You want to pay attention. Okay, well, what can I do to make myself pay attention? I can do something that requires attention. And taking notes is one of those things. It's the easiest thing you can do. So if you are taking notes, it means you have to listen. And the benefit to taking notes then, I think, is obvious. One, between and during sessions, you have things you can refer back to. Who was the innkeeper who talked about such and such? And now I'm realizing maybe that was a clue. What was his name? What was the name of that inn? Who else was in the room when there was that? Who was it? Did someone slip out the back door during the fight? I don't remember that person's name. Look, you can always ask your GM, yeah, who was that? What was that NPC's name? But I guarantee you, the degree of immersion and connection you will have in and with the story will be so much greater when you own that yourself because you've taken notes. So take notes. It's an easy way to make yourself accountable to paying attention to the other people at the table. And obviously then you're not talking over them. You're not having a sidebar conversation with anybody else. That is not only rude, but also removes you from your ability to listen to someone else. So another thing, obviously, is during initiative or during any kind of structured order of action, that is, order of action by player or character, be ready. Be ready when it's your turn, because the best thing, or one of the best things you can do, is you can keep the action up by not slowing things down. And that encourages engagement because it increases the energy level and the excitement at the table. And let's face it, it's much easier to be engaged with something that is interesting, is compelling, and is not slow and tedious and terrible. So a couple of very basic things for players, all right? Remove distractions, pay attention, take notes, be ready, know the rules. Those things, I think, are some of the simplest things that you can do. And they are such low-hanging fruit that if you do even just a few of those, and then you get good at them, that is, you develop them as habits so that you do them, and then you add in more, it will be much easier for you to be connected to that table with those people and that story. Now, on the GM side, know the rules. Obviously, know the rules, and this is not an and/or proposition. It is an and proposition. Know the rules and be willing to make rulings. Because the moment you start flipping through a rule book, and let's face it, that is going to happen in the most rules-intensive moments. And in most RPGs, the most rules-intensive moments are what? Combat. Combat is the one moment where you don't want to get bogged down referencing the rules, because then it slows down what ought to be an exciting and action-focused moment. And that's where the joke, D&D is like, the only game where a 5-hour journey across the countryside takes 3 minutes and a 3-minute fight takes 5 hours of real time. You don't want to do that. So you have to know the rules, but you also have to be willing, in the interest of keeping the action moving, to resist the urge to look up the rule when you're when you're not sure. Make a ruling instead. And like I said, now, the more I think about this, I need to do an episode on how to learn the rules. So I will do that. But know the rules, GM. Second thing, during those rules intensive, during combat, post initiative. Okay, there are lots of different ways to do this. If you're using a screen, I've seen people do this with great success. They can either use cards with the character names on them, or they can fold little tents and just align them along the top of your screen and have them go. Your side would be right to left. So you would count down from right to left, top of initiative, bottom of first, last, so that on the player's side, it reads left to right. And you can just arrange them. And if they're folded over, a little card folded over with the character name on the outside, character name, not player name, because then it encourages immersion into the story and the world. If initiative changes, you can just move those things. There are lots of different, models for how do you post initiative. In games that have fixed initiative, either fixed by round or fixed period by encounter, I always make the initiative known. And what I'll do is I'll say, okay, such and such is up first, followed by blah. So that I have at least like two. And whether it's an NPC or a PC, I will make sure that if it's a PC who's going next, that person knows, hey, you're on deck, you're coming up next, which then enables them to get in the mindset and be ready, which is what I'd said before. Players need to be ready, but post the initiative order. Don't be mysterious about it. Okay, when you are out of initiative order, though, how do you keep things flowing when you're out of initiative order? Now, I think it would be unnatural, and it's an unrealistic and unnatural expectation to think that you're always only going to have one person talking. No, there's going to be crosstalk. That's how conversations work. Interrupt has a negative connotation, but people talk over one another in perfectly civil conversation all the time. However, when you are out of initiative, when you're in initiative, insist that, hey, listen, let's keep the crosstalk and sidebar conversations to a minimum or none at all, because I want to make sure as GM that you understand what is happening so that everyone else who's present here knows what is happening. Whether you're using theater of the mind, makes it a little harder, or minis on the table, just to describe the situation. And the best way to do that is say, okay, so Sarah, your character is blah, 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 and this happens, this other thing here, I'm moving this little mini here, and so this is what this is actually happening. This is what's happening. As I'm describing that to Sarah, and her character, everyone else should be listening to that because they'd be there and, peripheral vision and things like that and hearing or whatnot. They would be aware enough of that in the room or the cave or the whatever. So minimize, ask to minimize any conversation outside of one person at a time or just between two people now so that people can be heard. Now, when you're out of initiative, the crosstalk between players can be a really good thing if they're talking in character and they're planning and things like that. But it also has a downside or can have a downside because your quieter players might just recede into the background and your talk boxes are going to, talk over everybody. And also details might get missed. Like at my table, I have 4 players. I have 2 on one side and 2 on the other. And sometimes what I'll have is the people on my left will talk with each other and the people on my right will talk with each other. And there isn't talk across the table. And then assumptions get made. I'm listening to both, but they're not talking with one another. And so a technique that you can use as a GM to try to connect the group more is to say, listen, hey, we're out of initiative right now, but as we say, move into this cavern, you're whatever, the group decides to move in, you're going to move into this cavern and explore the thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go clockwise and I'm going to take whatever I'm going to hear what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing, so everyone can hear. And then the next time I feed them new information or I am prompting them for what are your characters doing, I will go counterclockwise. So I just go back and forth and take it as it goes. If this person says, well, I'm going to go over here to this dark corner all by myself because like I have dark vision and I can see in there and nobody else can, so I'm going to wander over there. Okay, hey, are you saying anything to the rest of the party? Oh yeah, and then he has an opportunity to say things to the whole party and explain what they're doing, which then draws people in. But just that back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise, back and forth, it does a couple of things. First off, it provides focus for you and for your players. Who's talking, therefore who needs to be listened to while you're taking notes. You as GM as well taking notes. And it also provides regularity and consistency. And then people can trust, okay, it's my turn to say something. I am going to be afforded time to talk, which then hopefully tamps down on the desire to speak up and over someone else. And it also takes the quieter player who is there to either think to themselves, all right, I'm either going to act out, speak in character, or I'm just going to describe what my character does, but I need to be present and I need to be engaged. So that back and forth, it's pretty simple. And when developed as a habit, I think it helps everybody come together and focus on the game more. Also for GMs, if you are not using theater of the mind, that is, if you are using minis and or terrain, whether you're just using 2-dimensional maps on which you're drawing and you've got some minis on top of it, or you've got all kinds of complicated terrain and whatnot, I highly recommend, especially if you're using maps, draw them all out in advance. If possible, draw them all out in advance and maybe layer them on your table. Or if you have one of those funky tables with like a cover and like a recessed area in the middle, or perhaps you have, depending on the space in which you're gaming, you have an opportunity to you have an extra table, so you put a map over there, maybe lay a piece of paper over it. And I'm guilty of this. We're all guilty of this, I think. But what you don't want to do is in the middle of something like, oh, the action is about to happen. Oh, stop. I'm going to draw a map and piddle around. And I totally do that. And I have to it's easy to get sloppy like that. I have to get out of that habit. I've seen a lot of these, and I have some of these flip books, these spiral bound flip books with lots of canned maps. And when I'm really planning ahead, well, I'll put Post-it notes and I'll number them. Like if I have multiples that I want to use in one session, I will stick a Post-it note hanging out of the edge of the flip book with a number on it, 1, 2, 3, whatever, so that I know where we're going first. And I've already thought through how I'm going to use that map. Because again, when you do something meta, when you do something real, that slows down or turns the attention away from the action at the table, you drain away the energy. So if you're going to use maps, draw them, as many of them as you can in advance, or prepare them and then arrange them for yourself in such a way that it makes it easy for you when the moment comes to say, whoop, here's the new map. Now, if you're going to use minis in terrain, this is harder. This is obviously a lot harder because what happens, you're going to have a big battle or something like that in, I don't know, like a dungeon. How's that? Gee, that sounds original. Do you want to set the whole thing up and then the players come in and they're like, oh, that's where everything is. Maybe there's not stuff in the rooms, but that's a preference thing. I'm more a fan with terrain and whatnot of putting together the scene of an important moment, not the whole thing. And I actually have the table that I built several years ago has a center panel that's about like 3 feet by almost 4 feet that lifts off, and then there's a recessed area that's about that deep, maybe 4 inches or so in the middle that has I can put a mat on, and I can put some basic terrain stuff in there. And then if I want to put taller things like trees or junk like that, when we get to that, like I'll have the like a flat map on top of that, and then when we're done with that, I pull that off comes the board, and then a couple of trees or like hills or things like that were too tall go on very quickly because I've planned that out in advance. I know exactly where I'm going to put them. I want to have the real world stuff that is related to arranging those things to take up as little time and space and effort as possible so that, again, the focus can stay on the game. So a couple of things for the GM. Post initiative, move left to right, right to left when you are out of initiative. Make sure that when you are either in initiative or not, when you are explaining or describing or getting information from a player, ideally it is a one-to-one conversation with that player that everyone else is able to watch and hear. Know the rules. Know the rules, and obviously this is a much more burdensome thing for a GM than for players, but you got to know the rules. And, and be confident enough and willing to make rulings instead of page flipping. Now, maybe there are things like in, crunchier games, and I've rediscovered this with 3.5 D&D, that there are things you can't remember. Maybe there are a bunch of little details and modifiers and stuff that you can't remember. That's what screens are for. Or reference sheets that you put out right in front of you, and you put the things that have the highest density of crunch and therefore the greatest likelihood for you to forget the details of, you put that stuff in front of you so you can quickly go to it. And like I said, I'll do an episode about how to learn and remember the rules so that you don't have to page flip. I'll do that in the next week or so. But yeah, there it is. Engagement. These are not difficult things to do. However, they take some planning. But even more than that, they take the discipline that is required to build a habit, and also the discipline, especially when it comes to crosstalk or checking out a little bit while others are talking. It takes a little discipline to build the habit of actively listening to somebody else and taking notes. I think if you try some of those things out, you will find that you as a player, it's much easier to get connected to the story and be clued in on what's going on, which makes it more fun and makes it easier for you to do things in character that fit the story and are more effective. As a GM, I think you will get more satisfaction because you won't feel like you're just talking to clouds or having to repeat yourself umpteen times because players didn't hear what you said, or things got overlooked, or a player gets overlooked in initiative. I did that this last week, and I was like, how the heck did that happen? But anyway, so as always, thank you for listening. And if you have other techniques or tactics for being engaged, either as a player yourself or as a GM, or getting others to be and stay engaged, I would love to hear what you think, because a rising tide floats all boats, and good ideas can come from all kinds of places. So share them in the notes, and thanks as always. Have a great day. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.